Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Something that we're going to try here on the Aaron Torres Pod and Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. We did it a few years ago. We have not done it since, but with June being a pretty slow month, with producer Matt on board kind of to help me with some of the editing things, what we're going to do is we're going to bring back what we call off-season grades in college hoops. Pretty straightforward segment that I think you can kind of figure things out. But essentially, the bottom line is this. By mid to late June, which is where we are now, we know what virtually every college basketball roster looks like. The NBA draft deadline is done. Every marquee portal player that I can tell is out. I think there's, of my top 100, I think there's one player left available, Arthur Kaluma, who's like the bottom 20 of available players. And so you're not going to get any major upheaval. And so I think it's time to start looking at rosters, looking at off seasons, and going ahead and handing out grades. And so where I want to start today, and I think it's an appropriate place to start, is with the Kentucky Wildcats. Arguably the biggest brand in college basketball, new head coach, entirely new roster from a year ago. And I just think it's a fun place to start. By the way, if you missed the top of the show, we're going to do these for all of the big programs: UConn, North Carolina, Duke, Arizona, Kansas, Arkansas, etc. But like I said, let's go ahead and talk Kentucky. Let's talk their offseason, what I liked, if there was anything that I didn't like, and ultimately how I would grade it. And again, this will be a continuing series all June and probably into July. Now, in terms of Kentucky, let me say this. First off, wild offseason. And I still go back, and I'm going to talk about the name that no Kentucky fan wants to hear about. But I still go back to that Oakland game with John Calipari still on the sidelines. And I remember after that loss, we did the show. You can go back and find it. But I just remember doing that show. And it was so toxic all around. And this isn't where I blame the fans and it's all the fans' fault. That's not what I'm going to do now. But it just felt like that thing had run its course. But I remember thinking at the same time, it's like, how are you going to get out of this? You can't pay the $33 million, but he's too stubborn to quit. And if you go back to that night, I said, I actually think John Calipari should resign. Bring it up. You know what happened. The chicken man from Arkansas, John Tyson, calls John Calipari. John Calipari meets with Hunter Yurachek. Final Four weekend, John Calipari is out the door to Arkansas. Go through a coaching search. Listen, I'll say this. I said it at the time. I stand by it. I don't regret what I said. But didn't love the process to get to Mark Pope. But you can go back and listen to those shows. I liked the Mark Pope hire. I didn't love the process because you went after a guy, Scott Drew. If you're Mitch Barnhart, that you've been promising for years to your fan base, he says no. You go after Dan Hurley when you know Dan Hurley's going to say no. And then I also thought you could have waited for Billy Donovan. Bring it full circle to say that I did like Mark Pope. We had him on the show when he was at BYU many years ago. And basically what Kentucky fans are seeing right now is what I said the day he was hired. That this is a guy that is full of energy, full of enthusiasm. As he said, he understands the assignment. In other words, the Kentucky job is not going to be too big for him because he lived it. He knows what it's like every single day to be living and playing and part of BBN. As a matter of fact, I don't know if he said this in any of his interviews, but I remember him saying it on this podcast when we had him on many years ago. He said, actually, why he has such a good perspective is because he actually redshirted his first year at Kentucky. You go back to that era, he, of course, was in an era when he transferred from Washington, he had to sit out for a year. And so he kind of got back, was able to sit back, see BBN for what it is, take a deep breath, see how intense it is, how passionate it is, how excited the fan base is. And so there is no one, listen, you could argue, is he the best candidate? Is he the most qualified candidate? Whatever. I don't think you can argue that there was a single person that understood the job, the requirements and expectations quite like Mark Pope. And so to Mitch Barnhart's credit, didn't love the process, but loved the end result, loved what they got out of that job. And now you are out of the job opening. And now you start talking about the players that he brought in. And I love the roster that he put together. And I know what everyone's going, oh, Torres is just a big Kentucky homer. No, 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 no. I've said from the beginning, even before Jackson Robinson committed, I said, if you actually break down this roster, a lot of very good veterans, couple developmental freshmen, but more importantly, it's not just about recruiting individuals. It's about recruiting guys that fit this system, that fit what Mark Pope wants to do. And in this portal era, he got really old and really experienced, something that I think Kentucky fans are going to embrace. In terms of the process, look, I love how he went about putting together this team. Focused on the defensive end first. Amari Williams, center, Drexel, 3-time defensive player of the year, and in my opinion, the best defensive player in the paint in the transfer portal this offseason. And you can argue and you can debate whatever. All I know is he chose Kentucky over St. John's. If you choose anybody over Rick Pitino, that is a recruiting win. And so you have that element of it. Then you go get Lamont Butler. This might have been their best recruiting coup given everything. Lamont Butler entered the portal on a Wednesday night. Kentucky staff flies cross country Friday morning, seals the commitment by Friday midday while Lamont Butler was working out in Vegas as part of the NBA draft process. So you have your pillars in the paint and on the perimeter. Lamont Butler, the Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year. I've said it before. I don't care what he scored at San Diego State. He is a better offensive player than people give him credit for. But with this team, I just don't know how much he's actually going to be asked to score. That's because on top of those two, you had Kobe Brea, statistically the best three-point shooter in college basketball last year. I know Reed Sheppard had a higher percentage, but Kobe Brea was a guy that among players that qualified in the NCAA kind of record books, if you will, Kobe Brea was number one, 49.8% shooting from behind the three-point arc on 201 attempts. I mean, when you hit 49% on 200 attempts, it means that you're doing something right. And then from there, you had Andrew Carr. I think Andrew Carr is maybe the most underrated player in this class, almost 14 points per game at Wake Forest. You had Brandon Garrison, the center from Oklahoma State, probably a backup. And then, the last big one, and I know there were other players, to be clear. I'm very aware that, Ansley Almanor committed from Fairleigh Dickinson. I understand that late in the process, you get Kirk Kriisa or a little bit later. But then I also, you get to the point where you do need that scoring pop, and you do get it in Jackson Robinson late in the process. And so when I look at this team, listen, I've said it before. I don't criticize other media members who have differing opinions than me. Listen, I miss on stuff all the time. That's why we do Aaron Right, Aaron Wrong on this show, my best and worst takes of the week. I get stuff wrong all the time. But let's just talk through this Kentucky roster and the idea that some people don't think it's a top 25 roster, okay? Think about this, okay? Think about this. This is the Kentucky roster for 2024-2025. You added the best defensive point guard in the portal in Lamont Butler, the best defensive big man in the portal in Amari Williams. You added the best three-point shooter in the portal in Kobe Brea. You added 4 guys who averaged double figures at the Power 5 level last year. Jackson Robinson, Kirk Kriisa at West Virginia, You also added Andrew Carr, the forward from Wake Forest. You also added, on top of that, Otega Oweh from Oklahoma. So 4 guys who averaged double figures, the best three-point shooter in the portal, the best defensive big man in the portal, the best defensive guard in the portal. Here are your backups. Kirk Kriisa is probably going to be the backup at point guard, 4-year starter in major college basketball. Brandon Garrison is going to be your backup center, a player who was a McDonald's All-American. And then your developmental pieces are 2 top 100 prospects in Trent Noah and Travis Perry, both from Kentucky, and Colin Chandler, who's a former top 30 recruit who was committed to BYU, who was overseas on a mission trip. And so I could go on, and it's going to be an adjustment, and it's not going to be perfect, and there's going to be bumps along the way. But I just don't get the idea that somehow, some way, this isn't a really good roster that, in my opinion, is a top 15 roster in the country. I'm at number 14 in my way too early top 25. I think you could move them a spot or two up. Listen, I don't think you can put them ahead of Alabama. I don't think you can put them ahead of UConn. I don't think you can put them ahead of Kansas. But I mean, you even get to like 7, 8, 9. Carolina's good, but they missed on some guys. Duke's good, but it's mostly freshmen. This Kentucky team is well put together. And I think most importantly, they're a veteran team with lots of experience too. Remember, Lamont Butler has played in a national championship game for San Diego State. Kirk Kriisa won a Pac-12 title, was part of a #1 seed at Arizona. On top of those two, Jackson Robinson has played in an NCAA tournament. Kobe Bray has played in an NCAA tournament. I mentioned Kirk Kriisa. So you have experience. You have talent. By the way, probably the most experienced team in college basketball going into next year. I was thinking about this. Jackson Robinson, 5th-year senior. Amari Williams, 5th-year senior. Kobe Bray, a 5th-year senior. Lamont Butler, 5th-year senior. Andrew Carr, 5th-year senior. Kirk Kriisa, 5th-year senior. That's 6 5-year seniors. So when I look at Kentucky, when I look at their offseason, I got to be honest. I got to give them probably an A minus maybe. I mean, I guess you can't give them the A++ because they didn't get everybody they wanted. They didn't get Chaz Lanier. Okay. We'll see if Chaz Lanier, what he ends up doing. I'd rather have Jackson Robinson having played in Mark Pope's system. So they missed on a few guys. But I give him an A. Because remember, he started with nothing. A roster of 0. And when you factor in the grade for Kentucky, you also have to remember, Mark Pope, I believe, has put together one of the best staffs in the country. Alvin Brooks is one of the best assistant coaches in all of college basketball, won a national championship at Baylor, could have stayed there until he got a head coaching job, comes to Kentucky. Jason Hart, we've talked about on and on what he will bring to that program. And I got to give Mark Pope an A for his offseason. Credit to Mark Pope. Really, really, really good offseason from him. That is your first official offseason college hoops grade. We'll do more of those on North Carolina, Duke, Louisville, UConn, Kansas, Arkansas, whoever, on and on. But that is our first one right there.